Chapter 39, Al-Zumar, the companies, revealed at Mecca, 8 sections, 75 verses. The name of this chapter, the companies, refers to the two classes, the believers and the disbelievers. Its revelation belongs to the middle Meccan period. Sincere obedience to Allah is required in the first section. Those who obey are the believers, and those who refuse to obey are the disbelievers. And the two are spoken of in the next section. The third shows that Al-Qur'an is a perfect guidance, and the fourth, that its rejectors will be punished. The fifth emphasizes the punishment of rejectors by stating that evil will not be averted from those who persist in rejection, and the sixth calls attention to divine mercy, which is so vast that the greatest sinners have no reason to despair. The last two sections speak of the coming of the judgment, when each of the two parties is made to taste that which it deserves. And there's that wonderful verse within that mentions the sensual, the emotional, the psychiatric highs of the believers responding to the revelation. Chapter 4, Al-Mu'min, the believer. Revealed at Mecca, 9 sections, 85 verses. The title of this chapter, Al-Mu'min, or the believer, is taken from the mention of a believer in Moses from among Pharaoh's people. Verse 28. This man pleaded for Moses when Pharaoh wanted to kill him, and drew attention to the fact that if Moses preached the truth, no opposition to him could prosper. From this, the 40th to the 46th chapter, there is a group of 7 chapters which all begin with the Ha-Mim, and are therefore called Al-Ha-Mim, i.e. the chapters beginning with Ha-Mim. They all belong to the period when opposition to the Holy Prophet was very bitter, and active persecution of the Muslimin had begun, which culminated in their first flight to Abyssinia, and they belong to the Middle Meccan period. All these chapters are further akin inasmuch as they offer a solace to the persecuted Muslimin, warn the persecutors, and foretell the triumph of truth and the failure of opposition. In fact, the failure of opposing forces is the chief theme of these chapters. This is made plain by a saying of the Holy Prophet, which is included in note 2171. There is not much of the history of the earlier prophets, with the exception of Moses and Abraham, and bare references to others or the fate of their people. The unity and power of Allah is the constant theme, and there are frequent appeals to the believers to take advantage of divine mercy. This chapter opens with the statement relating to the divine plan for the protection of the faithful, who are told that they should not be misled by the power of the opponents, which will soon be broken. The second section continues the approach of their doom, which would be, when they're perfectly helpless. The next 3 sections repeat the warning with the references to Moses' history. The 6th states that the prophets of God and the believers in them are always assisted against their opponents, while the 7th calls attention to the great power of Allah, with whom nothing is impossible. The last 2 sections again deal with the ends of opposition, repeatedly warning the disbelievers. And chapter 41, Ha-Mim, revealed at Mecca, 6 sections, 54 verses. This chapter bears the name of its initials, Ha-Mim, or Ha-Mim Asajda. It is also known as Fusilat, which means a thing made plain, the word occurring in verse 3. It is the second chapter of the Ha-Mim group as regards its subject matter and date of revelation. The first section contains an invitation to the acceptance of the truth. The second gives a warning in case of rejection. The third refers to the evidence of man's own faculties against the rejection of truth. The fourth shows that believers are strengthened by inspiration, and the fifth points to the effect of revelation, which gives life to those that are morally and spiritually dead. But if warnings and arguments are not heeded, the doom is inevitable, the signs of which could be witnessed in the gradual spread of truth. This is stated in the 6th section. And chapter 42, Ashura, Council, revealed at Mecca, 5 sections, 53 verses. This is the third chapter of the Hamim group and is known as the Council. The title is taken from verse 38, which enjoins al-Muslimin to make it a rule to take counsel in all affairs of importance. The injunction lays down the basis for government by council or parliamentary government. As regards the date of revelation and the context, see the introduction note in chapter 40. Having spoken of the consequences of the rejection of truth in the last chapter, we are here told that divine mercy is predominant over all other divine attributes, and accordingly, the first section tells us that even the act of warning is a merciful act on the part of the divine being, for he reveals his will through his prophet, when his angels solicit forgiveness for men. The second section states that divine judgment is given to settle differences. The third shows that Allah's dealing with men is just, and no nation is destroyed unjustly. The fourth section calls attention to the fact that even the unjust are given respite, for the believers must wait patiently. The last section states that Al-Qur'an, being a revelation from the divine being, guides aright. Hence, those who do not follow its directions will find themselves in an evil plight. Chapter 43. Az-Zukhruf, gold, revealed at Mecca, 7 sections, 89 verses. This is the fourth chapter of the Hamim group and is named gold from the mention of Zukhruf in verse 35, where it is stated that not gold and silver and worldly embellishments, but righteous deeds are acceptable to God. In fact, these are the things which keep men from the truth. For the date of revelation, see the introductory note to chapter 40. The chapter opens with the declaration of the revelation of the Holy Qur'an from the Almighty God, as do all the chapters of this group. The reminder is not withheld from a people, we are here told, on account of their transgressions, because revelation comes to man as a favor from the merciful God. The second section is devoted to the condemnation of various sorts of polytheism. The third begins with the mention of Abraham, the father of many, a chosen one of God, and, after referring to the prophet's rejection, answers the objection as to why an influential man, or a man of wealth, was not chosen to convey the divine message. It is in this connection that we are told that it is not the possession of gold and silver that makes a man great in the sight of God. The fourth follows, stating, who, being misled by evil companions, deny it, will reject their deeds. The fifth shows that a powerful ruler like Pharaoh was destroyed when he refused to listen to the truth when it was revealed to Moses. The mention of Moses is followed by a reference to Jesus in the sixth section, as the polytheists of Arabia justified their idolatry, and the Christian doctrine of the divinity of Jesus, which is here rejected. The last section contrasts the fate of the two parties, the believers and the disbelievers. We don't have an Islamic version of the gospel of prosperity. It's not whether you're rich or poor. It's, Chapter 44, Ad-Dukhan, the drought. Revealed at Mecca, 3 sections, 59 verses. This is the fifth chapter of the Hamim group. It is known as the drought, from the prophecy of the drought contained in verse 10. The prophecy is followed by another indicating that a severe punishment would follow if they did not repent. The case of Pharaoh, who is drowned because he hardened his heart, is then cited. The remaining 2 sections of the chapter are devoted to a description of the condition of the righteous and the wicked. The chapter is, as it were, an explanation of the nature of the doom which awaited the opponents. Chapter 45, Al-Jathiyah, the kneeling, revealed at Mecca, 4 sections, 37 verses. This is the 6th chapter of the Hamim group. Its title is taken from verse 28, which speaks of every nation ultimately kneeling before God. The first 2 sections speak of revelation. The revelation is from a mighty and wise God. If there are many signs of its truth, but the disbelievers still reject it, its signs of truth are mentioned in the second section, among these being the promise of conquest to those who would follow it, and the fulfillment of earlier prophecies respecting it. The third section refers to judgment and the disbelievers' denial of it because of the hardness of their hearts. The fourth speaks of the doom of the disbelievers and of the believers taking their place. Part 26, opens with chapter 46, Al-Ahqaf, the Sandhills, revealed at Mecca, 4 sections, 35 verses. This is the last chapter of the Hamim group and is entitled The Sandhills, the title being taken from the tracts of sand which contributed to the destruction of the tribe of Ad. Verse 21. The fact is mentioned to warn the Arabs that when a fate of a nation is sealed, it may be brought about on sea, as in the case of Pharaoh and his host, and on sand, as in the case of the tribe of Ad. For the date of revelation, see the introductory note to chapter 40. The chapter continues the subject matter of the last chapter, dealing with the truth of revelation in the first section and with the witness of truth in the second. The last 2 sections, soon after referring to the fate of Ad, contain a warning for those who reject the truth. Chapter 47, Muhammad, also called Qital, revealed at Medina, 4 sections, 34 verses. This chapter, entitled Muhammad, and also Qital, or war. The first title is due to the fact that this chapter foretells the condition of those who believe in the Holy Prophet Muhammad will be improved. They were in the very helpless condition from the time of its revelation, having fled from their homes for the safety of their lives and being threatened by a powerful enemy in their new home. The other title is due to the fact that this chapter shows that the punishment with which the disbelievers were threatened would be brought about by war, in which the ringleaders would perish, the others would be made prisoners, are vanquished and brought low. War is also a prelude to the spiritual awakening which is brought about by Islam a second time, opening with the statement that the exertions of those who prevent people from accepting the truth will be utterly fruitless. The first section goes on to say that this will be accomplished by war. The second section is mainly devoted to the same subject and further states that Mecca will be subjugated. The third section refers to those who regarded this, the most righteous war in history, as a calamity. The fourth section states that a separation will occur between the truly faithful and the hypocrites. The revelation of this chapter belongs to a period when war with the Quraysh had not yet begun, when its circumstances had arisen which showed war to be inevitable. Portions of the chapter may have been revealed during the Holy Prophet's flight from Mecca, but as a whole it must be assigned to the first year of the flight, and therefore it is to be placed before the Battle of Badr. The Hamim group of Meccan chapters is here followed by 3 Medina chapters, the 47th, the 48th, and the 49th, which show that all difficulties will be overcome by the help of God, and Islam will triumph in the world. And, of course, the chapter to be named Muhammad is going to be one that is, it's got to have one of the 4 mentions of Muhammad, you would say. But 74:4, just like 8:12, you've got to really be twisted to kind of turn that into something wrong or persecuting oriented or something. Chapter 48, Al-Fath, the victory, revealed at Medina. 4 sections, 29 verses. This chapter is entitled Al-Fath, or the victory, a very appropriate name because it deals with the conquest of Islam from the great moral victory attained at Hudaybiyah, mentioned in the opening verse, to the final triumph of Islam over all religions and systems of judgment of the world. In verse 28, the word Fath occurs several times in this chapter. It is remarkable that, although the Muslimin had already been victorious in several battles, not one of these victories, but a truce apparently disadvantageous to the Muslimin, is made the basis of the triumphal career of Islam. There is an indication of this in that the triumph of Islam lay in its moral conquest, the first of these after the flight being the apparent disadvantage, but the real moral conquest gained at Hudaybiyah. This fact makes clear that the connection of this chapter with the last, which speaks of the victory of Islam in battles, this one drawing attention to its real triumph, which lays in moral conquest. As regards to the date of revelation, we have Amar's testimony on record that the Holy Prophet recited it for the first time when returning from Hudaybiyah, Bukhari 64:37. Hence its revelation belongs to the 6th year of the Hijrah. The chapter opens by declaring that the Hudaybiyah truce to the real victory, and after referring to the disappointment of the hypocrites and the idolaters, concludes with a reference to the aid and allegiance which the faithful rendered to the Holy Prophet. See verse 10 and 18. The second section deals with the false excuses of the hypocrites, and separates them from the faithful by not allowing them to join the Muslimin in their expeditions. The third section prophesies more victories in battle, that at Khaybar and the conquest of Mecca being clearly hinted at. The fourth section brings the chapter into a close by making the important announcements that Islam will be made triumphant over all religions in the world. Systems of judgment too, but I don't have religion. No, the systems of judgment, the word deen. But just like later, you'll find end, beginning, the same. Here we have beginning, end, and that last verse of this chapter is the one that has all the Arabic letters, and it has the the three marks too. That's the Hamza. So basically, if you can say that verse, you can pretty much say anything in Arabic, right? Chapter 49, Al-Hujurat, the apartments, revealed at Medina, 2 sections, 18 verses. The chapter takes its title from verse 4, which enjoins the Muslimin not to call out to the Prophet from behind the private apartments, and not to have their opinions rise above the inspired by implication. It was revealed to teach good manners as well as good morals. When large masses began to enter Islam, and deputation after deputation came to Medina, the Holy Prophet was not only the spiritual head of the people, he was also a prophet who had to direct his people in their religious and temporal affairs. He had to decide their cases and to make laws for them, to lead them in prayer, to bow before God, and into the field to fight against a powerful enemy. And therefore it was necessary that the new converts to Islam should appreciate the value of his time. It however teaches respect, not only for the Prophet's privacy, but also for each other's privacy. The chapter was revealed in Medina in the 9th year Al-Hijrah. The opening verses are unanimously taken to refer to the time of the visit of the deputation of the Bani Tamim, as the previous chapter speaks of victories for the Muslimin, and as victory brings ease, the chapter denounces the vices of a civilized society living in ease and comfort, opening with an injunction as to the manners to be observed towards the Holy Prophet. The section is concluded with the direction requiring the Muslimin to make peace between Muslimin. The second section teaches the Muslimin some of the social virtues and enjoins them to avoid certain vices which are the bane of society, showing that brotherhood in Islam is not based on the distinction of tribes and families, but on piety and righteousness. Chapter 50, Qaf, revealed at Mecca, 3 sections, 45 verses. This chapter takes its name from the initial letter, Qaf, calling attention to the greatness of the power of the divine being, and deals with the resurrection, both with the spiritual resurrection of this life and the greater resurrection of the life after death. The first section draws attention to the testimony of nature and to there being a lesson in the fate of the former peoples. The second shows that every action has a consequence, and these consequences are made manifest on the day of judgment. And the third states that the good and the bad must each receive their due, and that a resurrection will be brought about in this life as well as in the hereafter. In fact, judgment and resurrection of this life are inseparably mingled with the judgment and resurrection of the next. Throughout this chapter, from here to the 56th chapter, there's a group of 7 Meccan chapters, all belonging to the early Meccan period, and all laying stress on the ultimate triumph of truth and the fact that divine judgment would soon come to pass. Chapter 51, Ad-Dariyat, the Scatterers, revealed at Mecca, 3 sections, 60 verses. The title of this chapter is taken from the mention of the scatterers of truth. In the first verse, attention is drawn in the first section of the gradual advancement of truth, which was gaining ground, and stress is laid upon the certainty of the judgment of the rejectors. The second section, opening with the announcement of the birth of a son to Abraham, which stands really for the birth of a new nation of righteous people, deals with the fate of some previous nations who were judged because of their evil deeds. The third, after an exhortation to seek refuge and Allah warns the opponents that their turn of good fortune is about to be ended, and they shall be judged. It is an early Meccan revelation, and verse 56 can be said to be the purpose of life, and 57, why, and 58, a response. Now, that's just one way to look at it. Chapter 52, the Mount At-Tur, the mountain. Revealed at Mecca, 2 sections, 49 verses. The name of this chapter is taken from the first verse, where the mention of the mountain is an introduction of a similarity between the Holy Prophet and the Israelite lawgiver. As Moses received a call on a mountain, Mount Sinai, it was in a mountain cave, Hira, that the prophet received a call. The similarity is carried further in the opening verses by mentioning the book, which furnished a guidance in both cases, and the house which was visited by the people. Punishment must, therefore, befall the opponents of the prophet, just as it befell the opponents of Moses. In the first section, along with this punishment of the wicked, is mentioned the reward to be granted to the faithful. The second section continues the subject of the punishment of the opponents, giving a plain hint toward the end that the opponents will be punished in this life as well. The chapter belongs to a very early Meccan period. Chapter 53. An-Najm, the star, revealed at Mecca, 3 sections, 62 verses. The word star, which gives its name to this chapter, occurs in the first verse. The last chapter deals with the success of the faithful and the destruction of their enemies, and speaks of the eminence to which the Holy Prophet would rise. The first section states that the Holy Prophet did not err and would rise to the highest eminence to which man can rise. The second section states that nothing can avail against truth, while the third refers to Allah's power as manifested in the destruction of falsehood. The date of revelation of this chapter may be assigned to the 5th year of the call, and it's one of those that people, even not believing in Islam, prostrated at the end. Al-Qamar, the moon, 54. Revealed at Mecca, 3 sections, 55 verses. The moon, the word occurring in the first verse and giving its title to this chapter, was a symbol of the power of the Arabs. As the chapter deals with the destruction of the opponents of truth, its title is appropriately taken from the miracle of the rending asunder of the moon, which indicated the overthrow of the power of the Quraysh. See note 2388. The first section, after warning the opponents of the Holy Prophet, contained mention of Noah and Ad. The second, of Thamud and Lot's people. The third, after a brief reference to Pharaoh and his hosts, contains a prophetical reference to the Battle of Badr, which was to humble the power of Quraysh. It is undoubtedly an early Meccan revelation. Chapter 55. Ar-Rahman, the Beneficent. Revealed at Mecca, 3 sections, 78 verses. This chapter is taken from the name of the divine being, the Beneficent, with which it begins, and the entire chapter speaks of the beneficence of Allah, both in the material and spiritual realms, repeating the words, "Which then of the bounties of your Lord will you reject?" It's interesting, that phrase repeated 31 times, and there's 31 verses in the Qur'an that mention jinn. I don't know what else has 31 times, but obviously that's one of the two. It opens with the statement that the revelation of Al-Qur'an to the Holy Prophet is an act of divine beneficence, and then proceeds to speak of the means which Allah has created for the physical sustenance of man, showing that He who made such elaborate arrangements for the material welfare of man could not have neglected his spiritual care. The second speaks of the judgment which must overtake the guilty because they persist in rejecting the spiritual benefits which a beneficent God has provided for them. The third deals with the reward that will accrue to the faithful who avail themselves of those spiritual benefits. This chapter belongs to the early Meccan period. 56 is one that's used to end the suffering of poverty. Al-Waqiyah, the event. Revealed at Mecca, 3 sections, 96 verses. The event referred to, from which the title of this chapter is taken, is the time of the meting out of the reward and punishment to the faithful and to the opponents respectively. This chapter speaks of three classes of men, the foremost among the faithful being indicated as a separate class, while the other two are the believers and their opponents. The first section, after stating that men will be divided into three classes, speaks of the two classes of the faithful. The second refers to the guilty opponents, while the third states that the judgment is inevitable, and the three classes will receive what they deserve. Chapter 57, Al-Hadid, the Iron. Revealed at Medina, 4 sections, 29 verses. This chapter is entitled Iron. This word occurs in verse 25 in reference to the punishment of the opponents who were bent upon extirpating Islam with the sword. It opens with a description of the greatness of the power and knowledge of Allah, containing a prophecy of the future conquest of Islam, but the Muslimin are told that they will have to make sacrifices and exert themselves to their utmost. The second section, after speaking of the hypocrites, prophesies that after the lapse of a long time, which will harden the hearts of the believers, the dead earth will again be brought to life. The third section refers to the temporary nature of all those worldly enjoyments which keep a man away from truth, and it closes with a reference to the punishment of those who take up the sword to annihilate Islam. The last section speaks of two kinds of divine grace which were in store for the believers. From this, the 57th chapter to the 66th, there is again a group of Medinan chapters which all seem to have been revealed from about the 4th to the 7th year of Al-Hijrah, with the exception of chapter 63, which seems to have been revealed in the 2nd year Al-Hijrah, and chapter 62 and 64, which in all probability were revealed in the 1st. This is the last group of Medinan revelations, and it complements the subject matter of the Medinan group of chapters with which the Holy Qur'an opens. It may be noted that 5 out of 10 chapters of this group commence with the hymn of the glorification of the divine being, which shows that this period was marked by the onward march of Islam. Chapter 58 starts part 28. Al-Mujadala, the pleading woman. Revealed at Medina, 3 sections, 22 verses. The title of this chapter is taken from the circumstances narrated in the first section. There was an old Arab custom of putting away the wife by calling her mother, but she was not thus divorced, nor did she continue to hold the status of a wife. A Muslim did the same. The wife complained to the Holy Prophet, and it is by reason of her complaint that she is called Al-Mujadala, or the pleading woman. Islam took up the cause of woman in the greatest earnestness, as in her person half the human race was rotting under severe oppression, and Islam came to deal a death blow to all kinds of oppression under which any class of society labored. The whole of the first section is devoted to this matter. The second section condemns secret councils against the Holy Prophet, which, owing to Islam having gained power, had become very frequent at Medina. The hypocrites and Jews especially, some Jews, I wasn't saying all the Jews, but taking part in these conspiracies. The third speaks more plainly of the hypocrites and the Jews, and enjoins al-Muslimin to be wary of them, and as they were hidden enemies of Islam, not to befriend them. The last chapter, 67:8 would indicate some terms towards that. The last chapter, having referred to the future conquest of al-Muslimin, this warns them of the secret plans of the enemies of Islam. Though this chapter deals with the conspiracies of the Jews and the hypocrites, it also deals with the rights of women, both of these being the subjects dealt with in the 4th chapter, to which, therefore, it forms, as it were, a complement. As regards the date of revelation, the chapter may be placed a little before the 33rd chapter, for the custom known as Zahar is fully dealt with here, while only a reference to it is contained in the 33rd chapter. As in the case of Khawla, that the prophet waited, the woman, for the divine revelation before giving a decision. It is evident that this reference to Zahar, contained in 33:4, was the latter revelation. Chapter 59. Al-Hashr. If I move, I squeak. The banishment. Revealed at Medina, 3 sections, 24 verses. This is the chair that squeaks. The chapter is appropriately termed the banishment, as it deals entirely with the banishment of the Jewish tribe called Bani Nadir, and matters arising out of it. The last chapter warned al-Muslimin of the secret plans of the Jews and the hypocrites, and it offers an example. The first section deals with the banishment itself and the property acquired thereby. The second shows how the hypocrites gave the Jews secret promises of help, but failed to fulfill them. And the third ends the chapter with an exhortation to the faithful and an exposition of some of the divine attributes, 17 of them, indicating the greatness and purity of the divine being. The date of revelation is the 4th year of the Hijrah, soon after the banishment, of which it speaks. Chapter 60. Al-Mumtahana, the woman who is examined, revealed at Medina. 2 sections, 13 verses. The whole of this chapter deals with the relations between al-Muslimin and the non-Muslims, and in particular with the undesirability of relations with those enemies who are bent upon extirpating Islam, and who, not being satiated with expelling al-Muslimin from their homes, now made war on them. It is in this connection that the Holy Prophet is enjoined to examine the women who came to him from among the idolaters and other misassociators for the purpose of embracing Islam, so that if they were found to be inspired by sincere motives, they should be retained. It is this circumstance which gives its title to this chapter. It shows that, notwithstanding enmity, the Muslims were required to be fair in their dealings with the disbelievers. A clear statement was needed regarding the relations of the two communities on account of the hostilities which had sprung up between them. This gives us the clue to its connection with the last chapter. The first section opens with an injunction against entering into friendly relations with enemies of Islam, and the example of Abraham is quoted. The second section, however, adds that every non-Muslim is not to be regarded as an enemy. This direction is given as it was at a very late date, furnishes a basic principle in a discussion of the question of friendly relations. It is then stated that women who fled from Mecca to escape persecution that women that fled persecution could be given a shelter if they were found on examination to be sincere. The date of revelation may be placed between the Treaty of Hudaybiyah and the conquest of Mecca. It was very likely the 7th year al-Hijrah. Chapter 61, As-Saf, the ranks, revealed at Medina, 2 sections, 14 verses. The title of this chapter is taken from the injunction to the Muslimin to fight in defense of the faith in ranks, for fighting was now essential for the preservation of the very life of the Muslim community. After giving that injunction, the first section speaks of Moses and Jesus, and the latter's prophecy with regard to the advent of the Holy Prophet, and is followed by a prophecy of the triumph of Islam over all other religions and systems of judgment. The second section exhorts the Muslimin to exert themselves in the cause of truth if they would see that the prophecy fulfilled, citing the example of Jesus. The date of revelation is probably the 1st or 2nd year al-Hijrah, and we can say there's a metaphorical fight too.